Hey Deckers, welcome to another performance roundup. I've got a ton of games to share with you with some updates on Sons of Forest, Ready or Not, Sker Ritual, Slay the Princess, Sea of Thieves, Stick of Truth, Cookie Cutter and Blood Bowl, as well as some other news and updates and some giveaways as well. So starting with a little tip, I don't know if you know about this, but did you know if you are installing something on your Steam Deck and you are on your PC, if you open up your Steam client and go to that game, click the little arrow next to the install option and select your Steam Deck, you can actually see the installation progress. So if you do want it in another room, like connected directly to the router for example, you can check up on the progress from another computer without having to go and physically look at it. In case you missed it from our socials and other updates, Chiaki4Deck got updated with HDR support. If you get this update by switching to desktop mode, you just need to go into the settings and change the codec to HDR, and you'll see that you will then have the HDR streaming options. This is only for the Steam Deck OLED model, but if you do have the OLED, then HDR on Chiaki4Deck looks absolutely phenomenal. Now there is another update. You'll notice that the screen is changing, the stretch and zoom controls. So if you do want to play without those bars, there is the zoom controls as well. And in case you also missed it, mic support was also added for Chiaki4Deck a little while back, but you'll need to change the controller mapping. So the mapping that I use now is the Chiaki4Deck Plus mic in the community mappings, and this binds the mute button to the L4 button, as well as the stretch and zoom controls to the R4 and R5, so you can get rid of those black bars on a whim. But obviously you will lose a little bit on the edges in that zoom, but it does make it a lot more immersive. But if you can deal with the black bars, then you will get your full picture just fine. And I must admit that the HDR on the Steam Deck OLED does look absolutely phenomenal, and we just got our hands on a PS Portal, so we will do a comparison for that very soon. I constantly get asked about what my setup is on the Steam Deck because I have a different layout. This is using the Decky Loader CSS Loader plugin. If you don't know about Decky Loader, check out the link in the description below. But I use two mods, the Obsidian and the Switch Like Home. So if I turn off the Switch Like Home, you can see it's back to the normal loader there. And if I turn off the Obsidian, I go back to the standard Steam Deck color scheme. I just like the jet black of Obsidian. It just really makes the Steam Deck pictures pop out. And with that Switch Like Home, it looks absolutely phenomenal. On to game performance. Cookie Cutter releases tomorrow. Huge thanks to Rogue Games for giving me early access to this one to test it out. This game is perfect on the Steam Deck. You can see I connected it up to my monitor, which is 120 FPS, and I'm getting over 100 frames per second very happily. So you're going to get a solid 60 on the LCD or a solid 90 on the OLED model. And at only 15 watts TDP, you are going to have an absolutely great time with this. It's absolutely mental. If you are into Risk of Rain Returns or Hades or any of those type of games, then you are going to have an absolute great time with this. The graphics are phenomenal. It's so vibrant on the OLED screen as well as some quirky stories, great comedy, and lots of gore as well. Next up, Blood Bowl Season 3 is here. This is still officially unsupported on the Steam Deck, but if you now run it under Proton Experimental or one of the GE Proton models, the cutscenes are now correctly working with no hitches or graphics glitches, so you can now get the full experience on Blood Bowl. Now I recommend that you run this under the medium preset, and that you will get a good 50 to 70 frames per second consistently, even with all of the nice cutscenes. This is a turn-based combat strategy version of like NFL, but much more brutal if you haven't come across Blood Bowl before. If you run this on high settings, it will dip fairly regularly into the 30s, but you can get much nicer graphics overall. Just drop the shadows down to medium to stop the dips a lot of the time. You'll see it does sit around the 30 to 40 frames per second, and it does push the TDP up around the 20 mark as well. But if you are on power and you just want it to look better, then high will work just fine. But if you want that longevity, then medium settings is best for Blood Bowl 3. Sea of Thieves is absolutely fantastic on deck. I was looking to do a full video on this, but actually the settings are very simple and there's no real need to dive into them quite deeply. So best way to play this is just to go into the settings and put on the rare graphics preset. This does have HDR though, which looks phenomenal on the OLED. But if you do have that, then I do also recommend increasing the brightness and color contrast on the HDR mode to 60 for brightness and 56 on the color contrast. It just gives it a better balance of vibrancy for me on my screen. But for those not running on HDR, obviously don't worry about that. But the rare preset is perfectly fine on this one. Just disable blur as well on the visibility, just to stop some of those effects and make it look really clear on deck. Now it will dip around 30 to 40 occasionally in some of the loading areas, but once the island's loaded, it will sit up around the 50 to 60 frames per second mark. But if you're on battery, you are going to be around 22 watts, so it will only give you a couple of hours. But if you are out at sea a lot of the time, you're going to get a great time with around 60 to 70 frames per second. So Sea of Thieves running superbly well on the Steam Deck, and with safer seas, you can go and explore at your own leisure. A while back we featured Slay the Princess in one of our top verified and playable Steam Deck games, and I was hugely grateful when Stride PR offered us a key for this. Black Tabby Games visual novel for Slay the Princess is absolutely fantastic. It doesn't play the best with controller, but you do have access to all of the options via the touchscreen, which makes it a little bit more bearable. The story, the comedy and the horror of this game is absolutely fantastic. So if you are into some visual novels or just comedic horror, then this is definitely a game for you to check out. You will be running around 8 watts, so you'll be able to play this through probably in 1 or 2 battery runs, as it's around a 6-hour run on the game and around 12 hours overall. A few weeks back, Sons of the Forest got a performance update adding FSR 2, meaning it's now playable on the Steam Deck. Officially, it's still unsupported, but as you can see, we are now able to run this at a good 30 to 40 frames per second. And version 1 doesn't officially release for at least 2 months, but the early access is still running really well. Just beware that loading into games still takes a really long time. It took just over 3 minutes for me to load into a pre-existing game. So if you do get stuck on the Sons of Forest loading screen going into a game, don't worry, just bear with it. But once you're in the game, it's running exceptionally well. I did run the low preset with a couple of tweaks to medium on the draw distance and grass, and putting the water up to high. And this was running between 30 and 60 frames per second consistently with FSR 2 on quality. Now there's not a huge amount of difference between low and medium presets, but it does drain the battery a little bit more, and you may as well just stick with the low so you get a higher consistently closer to that 40 frames per second mark rather than pulling you closer to 30 much more of the time. So if you're into your twisted survivals, then Sons of the Forest is one for you to check out. Huge thanks to Wales Interactive for giving us a copy of Sker Ritual to have a look at. We'll also have a giveaway. We've got 3 keys of this to give away after our current one finishes, so keep an eye out on our socials and our community posts. We'll drop a giveaway for this in the next week, and version 1 of this will release early next year, and we'll have another giveaway around that then as well. Settings wise, I was just able to run this on medium, but there is a bit of an issue with the resolution. If you run this at 800p, you get a little bit of text cut off on the left and right hand sides, but it doesn't affect the gameplay for the most part. But if you do want to drop that down to 720 and get the black bars top and bottom, the proportion is okay. Hopefully Wales Interactive will address this soon, as they do have most of their games running perfectly well on the Steam Deck, and this is just a little annoyance. Medium settings, they will get you around 40 to 60 frames per second very happily. If you want to partner up with some of your friends for this FPS escapist horror, then it's a fantastic game to dive into. Ready or Not version 1 releases today, and it's got a huge update and it's running fantastically well on the Steam Deck. Most of the levels that were available in early access have been overhauled and also expanded from 10 to 18 missions. The graphics on the loading screen are really heavy, and I do recommend putting this on the medium preset, and you can leave everything else pretty much as it is. Once you're past the loading screen, it does bounce between 40 and 60 frames per second depending on the environment and the initial loading spikes, but it does not support controller out of the box. So this does need a community mapping. There was a few decent ones out there, but not quite mapping all of the controls. So we have actually made our own community layout for this one, and this will allow you to play all of the mappings, and you can also tweak them. We've got virtual menus on both the left and right trackpads to sort out some of the missing functionality from previous mappings, and just to make things a little bit more intuitive. If you don't know how to do that, go into your controller settings, across to community mappings, and scroll down the list until you find the STG Ready or Not full Steam Deck mapping. Just one thing to check, as it didn't seem to export correctly. If you go into the virtual menus on the Interact controller, make sure that the general settings is set to click rather than touch release. Otherwise, you won't be able to heal yourself pressing and holding some of the actions, and same with the voice action. It needs to be on click for you to be able to press and hold on those touch menus. You can run this with the high graphics preset, however it does dip in the 30s quite often, and I did find it much less responsive. And because this game focuses on realism, you do need your wits about you and to be able to respond as quickly as possible, because if a guy runs around the corner or you breach into a corridor, you need to have your reaction time as good as possible. Last but not least is South Park Stick of Truth. A lot of you seen this in my library because I picked it up in the sales, and everybody keeps recommending this game to me. As far as best settings go, this game is capped at 30 frames per second, so no matter what deck you're playing it on, you are going to have a consistent experience around the 15 watts range and a good 3 to 4 hours battery life. So no major settings needed on this one. It performs exceptionally well. It's a great story and exceptionally funny as well, but you can only play it at 30 frames per second. That's everything in our list for this week. Let me know if it was a bit too long. We can always chop these up into smaller performance roundups, and let us know in the comments below what games you're picking up, what you think of these changes. Also be sure to keep an eye on our website at gamesinhand.com for all of the handheld news and updates around Proton and other giveaways. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next one.